Welcome to Global Perspectives. What happens to the average person in a conflict zone in terms of attitudes, perceptions, behavior, decision making? Vera Mironova, a visiting scholar at Harvard University, has experience in the subject area on the ground all across the world.
Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia.
Welcome to the show, Vera.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So this is a huge subject, and I'm not sure exactly where to start, but why don't you help us set a foundation by explaining what it is you do, and when you go into a conflict zone, what you're looking for. Because most of us, when we think about conflict zones, we think about people dying, people getting injured, property being damaged, the environment being affected, but there's a lot more to it, a lot of things we don't see.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true. It's a whole new field, academic-wise. So what I do is I go in a conflict and I talk to people about their decision-making. Civilians, refugees, civilians who stayed in the conflict, refugees who left, or actually active fighters. And it's not, like, for example, a lot of people who are looking at active fighters, they are looking at, why did you join? But there is a whole set of decisions they have to make. For example, first, why did you join? But then, what particular group did you join? Then, why you did not leave? Basically, every minute of their serving, we could ask them why you're still here. And it's a separate decision that influenced by other things that are ongoing. So it's important to see as many decisions as possible to understand how they are made in order to affect them.
Well, give us an example of a typical person who is on the ground in the middle of, whether it's a civil conflict or something broader than that. What is that person experiencing? Help us understand how that person's mind and emotions are being bombarded by any number of influences and forces.
So let's assume beginning of the Syrian war, very beginning. And so you're sitting, you personally or with a family, you're sitting there and trying to understand what should you do because environment changed, right? So you have to do something different from what you used to do, right? So you need to make a decision. First decision you need to make, are you staying or you are leaving, right? So you could either leave as a refugee or stay. So, for example, we did a survey. We surveyed 600 people in the beginning of Syrian war about those decisions. So people said that they left, interviewed refugees, because it's not safe to stay there and it doesn't give any money and we need to continue with our lives. Very understandable decision, right? But then the question is, why did others stay? Like as civilians or fighters, just the question is, why did you stay? So a lot of people stayed because they need to protect their property and family members. So basically, if father said, I'm staying, his mom is going to stay, his wife is going to stay, and it's a whole bunch of people. But also a lot of people said very emotionally that, we stayed because, there is a revolution we need to work with. We need to, the cause is more important. So that's the first decision. Are you staying or you're leaving? Then when you decided to stay, the leaving where? What country would you go? It's a different side. But for the people who stayed, next question is, in what capacity would you stay? Are you going to stay as a civilian or are you going to stay as a fighter? So that's the next decision. It's not like why you enlisted. It's a whole set of decisions before that. So then people decide who stayed. Are you going to go fight with a weapon or are you going to sit as a civilian? So people interviewed civilians who stayed as civilians. They said that they are not going to go fight because they don't have skills to do that. So they kind of understood that, of course, I'm pro-revolution. Assad should be out. But my participation is not going to add anything to this cause if I'm going to have a weapon. I'm going to be a pretty creepy soldier because I never did it. So for example, they still stayed. So here you could think about a baker, a guy who's like 65-year-old. He never held a gun, but he was baking bread. And he stayed as a capacity to continue baking bread, but that time for fighters. So that's his contribution to the war because those guys also need to eat, right? So that's his decision making. I'm going to continue baking for fighters because that's how I contribute to the revolution. On the other side, you have guys who were driven by extreme grievance. Again, a survey pointed out, who said that no matter, they're also not good soldiers in the beginning. They didn't have experience. But they said that they want to personally inflict damage on the enemy. So their grievance is on that level, higher than the baker's one, that they want to personally cause some harm to the enemy. So that's why they want to personally carry a weapon. So for example, we interviewed a guy, a fighter with one of the armed groups in Syria, who said he wants to be like those two guys who killed Gaddafi in Libya with their bare hands. And he was just, a guy, working a machine gun. But he was like, that's my goal. I want to kill, Assad with my bare hands. So the grievance is on that level. So that's a decision. And then for fighters, there is a next set of decisions. For example, which group to fight with. You remember in Syria, that still there are like thousands. In the beginning, it was like, even the names were repeating itself because it's a limited number of words you could make a name of the armed group. So then the question is which group to choose. And here we also did a survey of people who were switching groups, and a lot of people switched a lot of groups, like in a year, like 3, 4. It's more than we switched jobs, right? And here we ask them, how do you choose a group to switch to? And the question is rather mundane because everyone joined to fight against Assad. They're all fighting against Assad, putting ISIS aside, which has its own goals. But then people are choosing a group that is more functional as an institution. So for example, you decided to be an economist, you graduated with economic degree, and now you're choosing a bank to work for. They're all banks, right? But you're gonna work with a bank which offers you more money, that has a better career, that has medical insurance and so on. So the same thing here, fighters choose a group that is more functional. So leadership is not corrupt. Yes, it's a big problem. Armed group leadership is extremely corrupt. Then they care about fighters. They have doctors. Because it's not a question if you're going to get wounded or killed. It's kind of when. So that should be assured. Which group takes care of their wounded and family of killed? And who actually functions, like their logistics unit is functioning, that you could actually, legitimately participate in combat. And here, just an important note, that's how Jabhat al-Nusra, which is Al-Qaeda group, increased tremendously because all interviewed fighters said that it's the most organized group. So that's how they managed to absorb all those moderate armed group fighters.
Well, you've just described a very, very complicated environment, and I'm guessing all of that makes it more challenging for you as a researcher trying to understand what is happening on the scene. But given that people have these different interests, different inclinations, how do you establish trust? How do you assure that the person you're talking to for research purposes is really sharing what he or she believes?
That's very hard, I would agree with you. So we worked for like 5-6 years in the field, so we had this trust even when the revolution started. Then some questions, there's actually a bigger problem to that. Some things I'm asking them, they don't even know if it's true or not themselves. Because it's a very psychological thing. It's not that like I need some information from them that is like white or black. They don't understand themselves. They didn't think about it, that structurally, so it makes it harder. So for example, in a survey we did, we surveyed those members. We asked several questions different way. So for example, there was a challenge asking members of Jabhat al-Nusra, so we surveyed Jabhat al-Nusra, including Al-Qaeda affiliated group, about why they choose Jabhat al-Nusra over any other group. And there was a problem that a lot of them said, because it's the only Islamic group, and it's all for Islam and everyone else is not. And it was very suspicious because we felt that they're just showing off. So we changed the question. We're like, okay, congratulations, you're Jihadi of the Year, but what about others in your group? Why did they join Jabhat al-Nusra? And the choice, the most Islamic group, disappeared. It was like the least important. And then they started openly saying, yeah, no, those guys joined because, our leadership is the most adequate. We have more money and we actually function. But for them, they had to say that, of course, I joined for Islam because it's like a brand of the group. But when we asked them about abstract others, then we got an actual answer.
So I'd like you to take us into a few of the conflict zones that you have visited, and I know that you've been in so many interesting places, from the Balkans to the Middle East to you name it. But can you select one that was particularly compelling for a reason or a number of reasons? And then I'd also like to talk about your recent experience being embedded in another country, so that'll be a separate one, and then where you've just come back from. But I think if we start with a country of your choosing, where you had an experience that was special, unique in some way.
I guess in Yemen, I was one of the very last 5 civilians who left when the war started, when Houthi, I was in the center of Sana'a when Houthis overtook the government. It was an interesting experience.
And what did you gain from that experience in terms of your research? Did it cease to be a productive environment for you as things started to crumble, or did you have the ability to continue working there for a while?
It was a very interesting experience because it was kind of random, I was not there for that purpose, but it was the only conflict where kind of by accident I was able to see it from the very beginning, while the beginning didn't even happen yet. So usually I go somewhere where the war starts or started, but there the war even didn't start. They just overthrew the government. So I experienced myself, and I saw and I talked to people while they didn't even know that the war is starting. So it was 3 steps back from what I usually study. But that thing you kind of only could get by accident, because you could not predict if it's going to escalate or it will not.
Well, what about ease of access? Some countries are harder to get into than others. Do you have a particular problem in certain areas as far as getting in because of the work that you do?
Of course, there are countries that don't welcome any researcher journalists. They're particularly close. Yemen was very hard to get in. They didn't. I don't know about now, but at that point, Yemen embassy in U.S. didn't even give visas. Apparently, you were getting visa inside the country by some people who know some people who know some people. So that was challenging. But usually, with that kind of work, it's challenging everywhere. So you kind of take it for granted. Plus, I'm a Russian citizen, which does not make it easier.
I think it makes all of it even more interesting.
Yes, I was embedded with a right sector, which is an ultra-right, often assumed pro-Nazi group in Ukraine against Russians. So it also did not add to my profile.
Well, tell us about your other experience with being embedded in Iraq. I think that's something that a lot of our viewers would be interested in. How did that come about? What was the duration of the experience, and what exactly were you trying to study, evaluate, etc.?
Last year, I was embedded with Iraqi Special Operation Forces for the Battle of Mosul, on the ground. We were the forces that are actually pushing, taking new territory. I was the only researcher, and one of very few foreigners who were there. What I was interested in not actually combat, but the houses, safe houses, bases that Iraqi forces were taking. So it allowed me to be the first one in the safe house that it just took, and while the tea was still hot, the ISIS guys just left. And it was very important for me because I was doing kind of ethnography study. I interviewed a lot of ISIS foreign fighters and ISIS local fighters, and they told me about their decision making, about their life in ISIS. But it was very important for me to see it myself. So, one thing is that they describe, their base, and the second I'm just walking in there, and I found very interesting things. For example, I was going right after military intelligence, but we don't compete for things because, they're interested in tactical things. And I was interested about more personal things. And I found, for example, I found a notebook of a Russian fighter, quite good Russian language, so probably from Russia. And in addition to some military exercises, he was describing there some tactics. That notebook had cake recipes that my favorite part is that they included the ingredients that I have problems finding in Boston. Where did they find them in Mosul? Some special condensed milk. She's like, wow, they literally brought it in. Then I found a female notebook of some female that had love letters to her husband and poetry about how she misses her husband who is fighting in Beji. It's it's another town. I mean, it's a poetry. That's a side of them, of fighters, of actually any people on a battlefield we don't even think about. And I remember there was a refrigerator in one of the houses of foreign fighters that Iraqi forces took. There was a refrigerator that had something written on it. It was a marker, and it was a quote from a Russian advertisement from 90s. Like a joke, like a phrase we use here from like old jokes, and they wrote it on the refrigerator. So it tells you more, like this ethnography tells you a lot about their personality, about what they care about, and it helps you understand them.
It's difficult because you always try, when you're talking about the adversary, to dehumanize them to a significant extent so that you're more effective and efficient in terms of your work. But there is a side that we don't see. But how does that affect you in terms of your research? Do you feel that the person is more whole when you find out this kind of information? Do you end up sympathizing more with the person as a human being, not in terms of ideology and actions and so forth, but how does it affect you?
I mean, I do sympathize everyone there, because again, I'm studying the line of decision making, and if they did one weird decision, it just followed after that. But also, I think for purposes of counterinsurgency, it's very important to understand a person and a society, because they had a society there, right, that influenced itself. To understand that for future deeper understanding of counterinsurgency. Negotiations. I mean, I know that we don't negotiate, for example, with ISIS, but let's take any other group. To approach, we could be more productive approaching negotiating and the negotiations, understanding this group, because we used to talk to leaders, but we don't understand that they have actually a electorate. A leader would not agree on something that his fighters disagree with, because he would not be able to go back, or even if he would be pressed to agree on that, well, it would be useless because his fighters are going to turn away from him. So it's very important to understand people. And people are the main resource of armed groups, deeper. In terms of recruitment, one of the biggest surprises for me was we found a lot of foreign passports, mostly Russian, but also we found such things as school books. So basically a female ISIS wife took kids, a fighter took kids to Mosul, and they took Russian school books. Because, even if they would be school, they also want their kids to follow Russian curriculum because they trust it more because they themselves went there. Well, all immigrants do it. My family did it coming here. But it tells us much more than what we understand that, they all came to die on suicide. Well, if you go somewhere to die, you just don't take school books to follow curriculum of another country. It's much more complicated than that.
So there's so many parts to this that we could explore. We could spend the whole time just on one experience. But tell us about your most recent experience in another country. We were talking about this earlier off camera. Tell us what it was, why you chose to go there, and what the results were.
Right now I'm involved in interviewing ex-ISIS fighters, not only ISIS, ex-Nusra, ex-foreign fighters who were in Syria and Iraq. So they are outside of Syria and Iraq right now. Some of them went to prison and now they're free. And some of them are hiding all over the place. So I'm right now interviewing them about their experience back in ISIS, more than about what they're doing today. So again, I'm mostly interviewing foreign fighters from Russian speaking, from ex-USSR, guys from Caucasus, Uzbeks from Central Asia, folks, and so on, just because it's easier for me. First of all, they were on top of the ISIS structure, and second, because they trust me more because we could relate on the background and speak common language. It would be harder for me to interview someone from Morocco or Tunis. So I was interviewing the guys who are in hiding in Eastern Europe. They're in hiding, so I probably should not tell you where they are. But also, I was interviewing guys who just finished their sentence. They served their sentence in prison in Central Asia, in Kyrgyzstan. So I interviewed like 6 people about how is their life now after they went there, they came back, they did this sentence, so they're free to go, and how they are living right now, and what are they doing, how they're adapting back to normal life.
And without getting into specifics, how generally are they adapting to mainstream life in their respective countries? And are they trusted? Are they able to go about their lives the way they did before?
That's a very good question, because here it also comes to the decision, because the question is, why did they leave armed group in the first place? Because there are folks who left, because they just came there and that's not what they were promised, and they immediately left as soon as they were able to, because ISIS, for example, they didn't let anyone in, right? And they were like, oh my God, I want to forget, it was a mistake, I want to forget about it. Like, no. And those folks are totally fine right now. They 2 people I know, they run their own bakeries. They don't want to do anything with that. It was a mistake. They did it. Okay, like you try drugs. Well, that happens, right? Now you're a normal person. You don't have anything to do with this previous life. But also, for example, I have people who left, who came to ISIS because not that they were like ideological, but those guys were into looting and business. Like I call it business jihad. Like they didn't care exactly what they're fighting for, as long as they could increase in power, increase in money. And so when that went down, they left. So those guys, I'm extremely worried that they're going to get involved in crime, because that was their idea, to go to ISIS, to leave ISIS, and now they're free. And before ISIS, they were also involved in like robbing supermarkets in Russia. So, of course, those guys are still in their idea that they need to increase in power and money. So probably those guys are going to be involved in crime. But now it's more dangerous because now they had ISIS experience. It's not like a usual shoplifter, it's a well-trained one. But also there is a very interesting subgroup of people who went to ISIS for ideological reasons, like radical Islamists. But then they found out that ISIS did not actually fit their idea of a radical group. So basically they said, ISIS is not radical enough. They're not religious. And those guys left around 2015, and there's some of them like right now in hiding. But those guys are more radical religiously. I'm not talking about like going killing them all, but religiously they are much more radical than ISIS is or was. So for example, even ISIS, why they left? Because ISIS tried to kill them all, but some did survive, and they are now in hiding. So those folks I interviewed extensively. I mean, I'm not worried that they're going to do something in the near future. Just, they reach this ultimate corner of like radical religious thing that they just want to be left alone in a dark room, because like no one else matches them in a level of radicalism. But still, those people are a little bit weird, and, I don't think we kind of know how to work with them and so on. I mean, I'm not worried they're going to do something, like some terrorist attack, because they're absolutely against ISIS. And we need to give them credit, they did a very good job on preventing others from joining. Like, again, ex-drug addicts. Your mom tells you drugs are bad, and you're like, yeah, sure. But ex-drug addict was like, guys, have been there, drugs are bad. And it really worked. So they prevented a lot of people from their, society to go to ISIS when they left. But still, they're like on a ultra-radical side.
What about the issue of your own personal safety? Because I'm guessing that in many of these settings you may be one of the few, if not the only woman, who is conducting this kind of work.
Oh, I'm by far the only woman, and probably the only person who does that thing. Yes, safety is always a concern, and it comes from 2 sides. It comes from the government, who usually likes to put surveillance on me, and ISIS. But those armed groups, ISIS, probably less, much less, because, even a serial killer, it doesn't mean he kills everyone whom he meets on the street. So I know that when I'm meeting with them, for example, like I'm not their target. So we are, when we're talking, we're having the same, such same meeting as with anyone else. We're drinking coffee and, chat about stuff. I'm not their target. So I feel totally safe. Trained soldiers doesn't mean that like because he knows how to kill, he's going to kill a lot of people. So the same thing here. So I feel quite safe with that. Of course, they're psycho totally, but those are a different set of people. But a lot of countries, they don't want they don't appreciate that kind of work. Plus, they don't like to be known as a country that has those people.
As we come to the end of this show, could you talk to us just for a few minutes about what you would like to do next? Is there a country, or are there countries that you would like to visit? You've already visited quite a few. My understanding is more than 100, which is quite a feat. But are there some places that you have at the top of your list?
I'm finishing the book on behavior of fighters. Right now it's an academic press, and then I plan to work on a more public press book about behavior of people who lived under ISIS in Mosul. So for example, and how they continued with their jobs and lives under this repressive regime, because I personally feel very close to that, because based on what I learned right now, it sounded very similar to Soviet Russia, where I'm coming from.
Well, thank you very much, Vera Mironova, for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me in.
And thank you. For Global Perspectives, I'm John Bercia, and we'll see you next time.